Thanks for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is an experiment of kind of that solar flare type of look, or the crepuscular rays, the light beams kind of emanating from some source in there. But this is done on the Aspire Petallics Autumn Hay paper. 80-pound paper text, so it is very thin, you know. I'm used to working on cardstock, cover stock, but anyways, this is the color that I happen to have in that color scheme. I felt like doing something on this paper that was a little bit of a warmer themed scene, so going with this paper that has this kind of, you know, kind of warmer tinge to it. It's like a beige or something like that. Plus the fact that it is kind of your metallic style paper. I wanted to experiment with that and see what these white beams look like over that that tone of paper, that temperature of paper more specifically. But I thought it looked okay, and I added in some highlights using my white gel pen on the tops of some rocks. So we do have these other kind of little aspects or objects that are featuring some of that same hue or white that's been applied on there. So I don't know, I've always kind of been curious about that and what that would look like, and what the theme of this video series. I thought I would try it out, and I think it looks okay. I think it looks pretty cool. I put a few little these highlights on these branches, kind of bring in a little bit more continuity with that white on colored paper theme of this piece. Just thought I can add a little bit more highlights here and there to reiterate that lighting. So adding a little bit of highlights on the left-hand side of these branches and on the bottom side of these ones. And when I move over to the left side of the paper, I will highlight the right side, because that is where the lighting is coming from. Alright, so anyways, a warm, kind of metallic-y looking scene with those rays. Fun scene to do. As you'll see in this video, after you stamp your images out, if you're using dye-based inks, you'll need to wait for it to dry a little bit and set up before you start applying your other shadowy tones. But it doesn't take too long, and the impressions themselves came out a lot better than I thought they would, based on the fact that this is a metallic type of surface for this paper. So sometimes it's when I've used other types of metallic papers, the dye-based inks are being water-based, it just kind of I don't know, the surface of the paper kind of resists a little bit, but this one transferred just fine. So I don't know, I'll have to do a little more experimenting with this paper in the future using some I don't know, some different techniques, but I like what I saw so far. So anyways, if you choose to watch the video, hope you enjoy it. Okay, it's time to experiment here. Not that all the time isn't a time to experiment, but I'm going to be trying something a little bit different here. I'm starting with a piece of Aspire Petallics. This color is Autumn Hay paper. It is a 80-pound, shimmering 80-pound text paper. And I bought it at Kelly Paper again, but again it's by CTI. And it has that shimmering look to it. I mean, I've used this before, but I don't know, I typically don't work on text. I usually work on cover stock weight. And I'm going to be trying that kind of that flary type of look on here, with the white pigment ink. And I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, because usually to have that kind of that flary type of look, you should be starting with a paper that's white, so you can retain some white, and thus the flares look kind of more natural, because that's the lighting that you're putting in it. So I'm not quite sure what quite is going to look like over the top of something like this, but we'll find out here. Now, because this is kind of a warmer tinge, you know, paper, it's kind of a, you know, that shimmery, I don't know, kind of warm beige look. I thought I would go with a brown on here, just as a change up from, you know, black. Let me see here. I think I have some blue on here from yesterday. I don't even clean my stamps most of the time. A lot of times if it's a stamp that I'm always using in black, I don't know. I don't really feel the need to clean it off, and it, you know, it works just fine. I'm not working with your solvent inks or anything like that, so it's not really a problem just to leave the, you know, that ink on the stamp. I mean, naturally, if I switch up and I'm going with something like a pigment ink or something like that, then I'll always clean before I return to the dye-based ink. Or anytime I switch up with inks, I'll change up. But what do I clean my stamps with? I usually just put a little water on a paper towel, and that works just fine. Okay. This is a Memento Rich Cocoa. I'm usually not using this color to stamp out my objects, and so I'm not even really quite sure what it looks like when I'm using like a darker brown like this. Typically it's when I'm doing my layering with the sponge applicators, and this is like the, I don't know, a darker brown like that would usually be like third or fourth color being applied, so it's over the top of other colors. You know, the end result is going to be a little bit different looking than certainly just stamping my impressions out in that color and on a shimmery type of paper. I suspect this Petallics is going to resist the impression a little bit, the ink, really, the dye-based ink, water-based dye-based ink. So I'm thinking that this is going to stamp out a little bit lighter than what this ink would look like on a glossy or matte white paper or cardstock. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm leaving the stamp on the paper a little bit longer for that to attempt for kind of that maximum ink transference onto the paper. So let's see how this goes here. Actually, that's not too bad. It didn't resist as much as I thought it would. Actually, it looks just fine. I don't know why. I thought the Petallics before I didn't get a really good impression, you know, because it was kind of resistant. I don't know if that's something to do with the cardstock or something, and instead of, you know, the letter weight paper. I don't think so. I would think it has the same coating on it, but I don't know. Maybe not. Okay, I just inked the same color onto this rich cocoa, or onto the stamp using the rich cocoa. Overlap a little bit, of course, with the Lakeside Cove here. Okay. I don't know, that surprises me, as far as the impressions go. I expected that kind of iridescent, shimmery, whatever they use to make it shimmery. I expected that to resist things a touch. I don't know, maybe this paper isn't, I don't know, it looks pretty shimmery to me. I was going to say maybe it's a little bit less shimmery looking, but I don't know. Lesson learned. Always learning something new, especially if you're trying something completely new. Might not have been a bad idea to stamp this foreground out in black. You know, just for that extra depth. I still can, but I don't know, it has kind of a nice look to it, I guess. Let me see something. Can't tell. Okay. Yeah, I think that ink is a little bit... Oops. What am I doing here? 2 oak branches, stamped in the rich cocoa. Let's get a little bit of water texture down there, too. This is the water pattern small. About like so. And let's add in some reeds here. Alright, that is stamping beautifully. Alright. But it is a touch damp. It's hard for me to see. I think it's leaving a little bit of a... Yeah, okay, that ink is a little bit wet on this paper. So we have our composition right here. And one of the things I want to do is I want to add in some extra shadows in here and there. And I'll need to wait for the ink to dry a little bit. I'm just kind of looking around on this and trying to picture, you know, some of that little flary light in there. I'm trying to decide if I want to do that or not. It looks pretty good as is, and I would just add in some little flourishes, but I don't know, let's stick to the plan. Let's add that in there. But I'm going to wait for these images to set up so that when I sponge in some additional color in the form of the cocoa, we won't be smearing the... if it blends in a little bit, it's not too bad, but I don't want it to smear my foreground imagery. Especially, and maybe I'll put on a little bit of a kind of a vignette within the you know, around on the borders, the edges, to contain the scene a little bit more. And then I don't know, maybe I'll have those flares coming out from kind of behind, or I can have it coming in from the side like this. I don't know. We'll decide. We'll see how this sets up here and how it dries and how kind of dark the imagery looks as well. And then we'll think about some little highlights on the rocks in the background as well. So, okay, so I'll give this a few minutes to set up, and we'll see what it looks like at that point in time. Okay, I'm back. I went off to do some other things, but it's probably been about an hour. And the ink is completely dry, but this is kind of interesting. The paper is really bowed, which surprises me because I haven't laid down too much ink on this. But anyways, that's one of the reasons why I like working on kind of thicker cardstocks. I don't like that kind of curling aspect. So going with something like a 12-point cardstock, you know, kind of avoids the curling. Now on something like this, I would just mat it onto some matte paper, and then I would put it into a card format. So that, I mean, that, you know, in the end result, it's not really going to matter that this is curling like this. I can kind of counter curl it, and, you know, it lays flat, but yeah, it's just kind of nice working on a little bit more of a flat piece, you know, when you're doing it. Okay, now instead of just going with, let me tell you what, I'll work with some distress inks here. Instead of just going with just straight memento on here, I thought maybe I'd bring in some extra tones and see how those look on here. Here's a tea dye distress ink. You can just go with anything, kind of a, you know, your warmer toned kind of brown tan hue on here. And let's see, this is showing. I wasn't quite sure if it would or not. This tea dye tends to be, you know, fairly light in value. That looks like, looks pretty good, I think. kind of running it down here in the shadows of the water, you know, where rock meets water. I'm kind of keeping some of my rock tops a little bit lighter to give the illusion that that is where the lighting is coming from, so that the rocks are top lit, which is just kind of following, you know, in line with the image, the design itself, where the tops of the rocks are lighter than the bases. Okay, let's give it a little bit of a the scene in general, a little bit of a vignette. So making the edges a little bit darker, keeping in mind, you know, where that flare is going. You see that kind of snag like that? I have to be a little bit more careful about my pressure that I place on this so that it doesn't do that. Kind of snag the paper. This is quite a bit of a warmer light brown. So it stands out quite a bit from that rich cocoa impression ink. That being said, I will use the Memento Rich Cocoa again to add some additional tone. Okay, now this is walnut stain. It's a little bit of a darker brown, so I'm kind of working incrementally darker. If you don't have some of these inks or these kind of intermediate transitional colors, that's not a problem. Just go to whatever one you use to stamp out your scenes, and I think a lot of people have you know, a variety of distressing colors. Pretty popular line, and certainly brand. Tim Holtz. Okay, I'm being kind of careful about my placement here, just so it doesn't, you know, catch and buckle this, you know, this rather thin paper. And the ink applies really smoothly. This Petallics, you know, your metallic styles of paper, the ink really goes on to them very nicely and spreads easily. Okay, now let's get back to our Memento, and this will hopefully kind of unify the those colors with the use of the color that the images were stamped in. So by stamping in the imagery in this color, this hue, it's saying that that's kind of the lighting of the composition. So it stands to reason that you would use that same color again to bring in some of that extra tone. This looks pretty good as is. Let's try. I guess we'll try that that flare type of look. If it stands out too much, I won't put too much of it, or I can always remove it, I think. I know I can remove it on glossy, but this one I'll see. Alright, so we have some, you know, some decent tonal transitions in here, value transitions, going from light to dark. It spreads really nice on here. I'm sure this ink is a little bit wet, but since it's not the impressions that I, you know, doing this in, I'm not really too worried about it in terms of, you know, any kind of smearing. The images are safe, but, you know, what I'm saying is if I kind of smear some of that ink that's been laid down, as long as I don't leave a big fingerprint, actually I'm going to wipe off my fingers a little bit, it's not really going to matter. it's especially wet around the perimeter where, you know, I've laid down most of the tones, you know, for that vignette effect, but again, this is the very shimmery paper, so, you know, it kind of catches that light really nicely. As a tonal scene, I mean, it looks okay, but having that extra kind of shimmer like that, really, I don't know, it finishes off the scene really nicely. Or it gives it that, I don't know, it gives it a really nice look and feel. Okay, now I have a white gel pen here. Let's see if this works on this paper. I think I've tried these types of pens on these papers before, and it just kind of, you know, that ball roller didn't, you know, didn't really have anything to stick to. Let me see if my other pen's working. This pen is really good. I've used up all the ink in here. You can see there's just nothing left in here, so it comes to show you that these Univol Signos are pretty decent for the most part, you know, at least the ones that I've had, and you can really use them to the completion of their ink inside, so, you know, instead of it, you know, clogging up midway with, you know, like you can see this ink in here still, but I haven't used this one as much. This one's the 0.7, so it's a little bit smaller, but let's take a look here and see if this works. On here, it seems to be working just fine. What I'm doing is I'm adding these highlights on the tops of the rocks, and again, you just have to look at the design, reference the design itself, and you'll see that I've left, you know, areas that are lighter than others. Okay, you see the top of that rock. So those are places where highlighting comes in. You can kind of, you know, reiterate the highlighting on these objects in here. Where do you add more shadows? Well, I've made the areas on the designs darker in certain areas. That's where you kind of reiterate shadows with darker inks, and the highlights you reiterate with, you know, something like a gel pen. This focuses in. It's focusing on my hands a little bit more, probably because this surface is so reflective. Yeah, this is working really good on here, as far as capturing these highlights. So you have to have this kind of white light somewhere in there, other than, you know, just the you know, that flare that we'll add into the scene. Okay, adding a few little of these specular light, very reflective, represents reflective little reflective lighting, I guess, on the water's surface, and I'm just kind of going along with some of the texture on the water. Where it's dark, I'll just kind of add a little bit of a dot or line of white. Okay. See that? Actually, it's looking pretty good, I think. I'll add a few little more highlights here and there. Okay. When I was demonstrating at a recent rubber stamp convention, everyone wanted to know how, you know, if they didn't see me demonstrating and saw the sample card after the fact, you know, after completing the stamping portion of it. Everyone wanted to know how those were done, so here you have it in video form. But of course, it's a very easy technique. If you've seen these videos before, you just kind of mask off where you want that kind of flare to go, and add it, the flare, in there with some pigment ink. So Alright, now I'm going to be forcing this a little bit because there really isn't a real definitive area here that's it's a lot lighter. So, and this is kind of a hazy day, so you probably wouldn't be seeing this in actuality, but we'll add a couple of these in here and see how they look. And see, I'll have it coming from behind these trees. Okay, so back out a little bit here. Maybe I'll have it coming from, behind some of these trees, and it'll kind of pass in front of some other ones. Okay, so we'll kind of vary the ray a little bit, or a lot, taper it. I think I'm going to add it with this stylus tool. I'll go a little bit thicker towards the the origin of the flare, the light, or they call it crepuscular ray. And then as it kind of travels, it'll kind of taper off in terms of the brightness, or lightness of it, actually. Alright, so it looks like that. Okay. And let's put another one. I'll just say that the origin is right around there, so I'll do it like so. Taper it again, about like that. Add more white towards the source. So the strength of the beam kind of diminishes the farther away it gets from it. Okay, can I see that going? It looks really weird right now with only kind of two beams in there. You kind of have to, you're gonna have to work it a little bit. Let's see, let's go with one underneath this first beam. It's really, pigment inks really seem to dry a lot darker than what they look like when first applied, so you kind of have to go a little bit lighter, or, with a thicker application when you first apply it. I mean, you can always add more after it dries, but see how light that is right there? It'll get like that very soon. See, this one's going to dissipate, drying out too. And that's getting a little bit darker, so go a little bit more than you think you'll need, or think that, go more than what you think looks good, or looks right. And when it dries, it should look, kind of roughly where you want it to be. Alright, now this one maybe I won't go too light, because I want it to really kind of blend in with the background. Okay, but we'll have some there, a suggestion of that beam. Like so. See, they're all kind of emanating from that same kind of location. Let's see, let's get one up here, maybe. Gonna make a wider beam, but kind of light in value. Or actually, let me change that. I guess it's darker in value because I'm not putting on too thick of a coating of it. See, this one's getting a little bit darker as we sit here. Alright, how about one kind of coming roughly down here? You just have to kind of eyeball it. Make your decision. To me, I mean, nothing's really standing out strongly like, oh, you should put one right there, you know. I'm, kind of having to think about it and just, decide on something. So, just kind of you have to look at it and see how it's kind of developing. Alright, so we have these light beams coming across. Maybe one up there too. It looks a little unbalanced, huh, with the everything kind of coming from that one origin point and kind of flaring out in a similar symmetrical kind of pattern. It's a little bit too equal on both sides. So anyways, so I wanted a little bit more irregular looking, maybe 3 beams on one side and 4 on the other or something like that. Okay. This one right here is really starting to disappear, so let me add back to that one. It might be wiping off a little bit, because I'm kind of putting the paper on top, so it could be that too. It doesn't get so hard set into the paper, I mean, if dye-based inks dry kind of slowly, then pigment inks are going to dry even slower, typically. Unless it's the Brilliance one. Alright, so anyways, add a little bit more here. Kind of trails off. Alright, I think that looks okay. Alright, now let's add some more of this kind of mist. By having these beams in the light right here, or defining light, what you're saying is that there's moisture up in the air or something like that, or dust or something, and these light beams are hitting those suspended particles, and thus you can see them, okay? Could be fog or mist or whatever. So it stands to reason that there would be some additional suspended particles in different areas of the scene. So let's add some kind of that fog and mist type of look in some areas. I'm just grabbing a cotton swab and see how it's really, it's new, so it's okay, here we go. So it's hard packed in here, so you have to kind of loosen it up a little bit and unravel it. Okay. See that? It's kind of getting a little bit softer. Kind of developing my applicator. Alright, now we'll add a little bit of pigment ink to the applicator. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to smash this down. See, it's really too much on there anyway, but as I kind of tap this off, tapping off some of the ink, it's kind of smashing down the tip here and making it a little bit of a softer applicator for this type of application of this ink. So, point of origin of the light is coming from in here. Let's add a little bit of that light to those trees around in the area. There'd be kind of this glary light in there through some of these trees. And doing this kind of softens that point of origin for those light beams, and it's not so stark. Alright, now on some of these trees and here, maybe I'll add some of that light, some of the white ink, which represents light, okay? or reflective light, I guess you could say. So that it's mellowing out that point of origin in there, and we're putting more of this lighting within there. I added some more on the sides of these trees right here, on the right side of the tree, because the source of light is coming to the right of it. Alright, let's do the same thing for these background trees in here. Okay, now the trees on the right-hand side, the source of light is coming from the left of them, so on the left side of the tree I will add a little bit of this pigment ink to lighten, and I guess it softens that side of the tree as well. So we're kind of creating a relationship, you know, basically with the objects with these light beams, okay? And what the light beams are made from, light and moisture. So adding some of that. See this kind of branch right here, it's bottom lit, right? So I can add a little bit of this to that, you know, branch, and over here, you know, suddenly it's kind of more on the right hand side as far as the left hand, you know, side imagery. Here's these branches right here, the light is coming from here, so I can, again, I can bottom light them a little bit. By the time I get over here, it's bottom, but it's kind of more side lit, so I can hit the side of that branch. Okay, maybe some more trees in the background, or maybe they're a little bit lighter the farther back they are. Okay. Looking very flare-ish. Okay, now on the base of the water here, I can add a little bit of mist or something like that. Maybe the beams of light are illuminating a lot of the moisture in the air around these rocks. I like to add this type of mist where kind of dark meets light, as I've mentioned in that video, where I'm showing, you know, some of the points on pigment ink applications. Adding some of this into the water here. Water tends to be a very, very reflective type of substance, so I can kind of make the area in here a little bit lighter, where it's capturing that light from the sky, or reflecting that light from the sky, I should say. Let's add a little bit more on these trees. I'm getting a little bit more kind of liberal with my usage of this white ink. Kind of the lighter it goes, I feel kind of more emboldened to use more of that ink on this tip right here. The scene itself isn't really dark, so, you know, even if you do have a pretty decent amount of ink on this, it doesn't show up as much because the contrast isn't as extreme. Alright, so that looks okay, I think. Oh, with this type of color scheme right here, we do have these kind of gold paint pens, you know? And with this shimmery type of surface, maybe it'd be nice to add a little bit of a gold highlight here and there. I'm adding it in the water. I'm kind of adding it in areas that have roughly the same value in terms of light and dark as this gold mark, okay? So you can't really see it too much, but let's see if I can show it on this video. You can see where I've added it down here a little bit, but okay, it's still a little wet, but I don't know, you can see it kind of glisten a little bit in the light, which is a fun little touch to add. But anyways, those beams, you know, show up pretty. It's kind of funny, these beams don't show up as much, like at a certain angle, but then you hold it up at another angle and it really stands out more, because it's because of that reflective quality of the paper. Alright, so I'm curious to see what this looks like when it dries. The dye-based inks tend to dry lighter than what they look like when they're wet, and these beams, when dry, will appear a lot darker than they looked when first applied as well. So kind of have to wait for that to happen to see what this looks like. And down the line I'll matte this card as well. So kind of a fun scene in terms of you know, the metallic nature of these papers. I really like working on that type of paper or cardstock, and this is the first time I've ever worked with the paper. I suspect this is going to kind of bow again, but no problem. Yeah, see, it's already kind of starting to bow as it sits here. So I guess you saturate something paper with ink like that, and it will kind of bow a little bit upon its point when it's dry. So anyways, but the pigment ink too will dry darker, so I'm curious to see what that looks like when this is dry. But anyways, I like this in terms of the overall effect. I'll have to do it again sometime. And I don't know, I'm kind of surprised at how, you know, that this is white here, and it does stand out quite a bit, but it blends in a lot better than I thought it would. I guess this white in here is a little bit more translucent. I mean, one of the things that I could have done too, or still can do, is you know, I have this like canary colored pigment ink, and you know, possibly you can add in like warmer toned kind of flares. You'd want them to be, you know, lighter at some point in time and kind of dissipate as it moves farther away from the source. But I don't know, maybe you can use something like this on these points. I don't know, maybe it'd look awkward though. I'm not really quite sure. When I look at these two colors here, it doesn't look like they blend in with that color scheme too much. Maybe this one a little bit more, but if kind of applied in kind of a translucent, thinner layer, then it, you know, you'd get the colors from the background showing through. So I don't know, more things to experiment with down the line, but I think this card is done for now, or this scene is done for now. I'll put it into a card format later, but I think this one will look really good with some matting, and maybe a gold matte or something like that, or a bronze matte on the perimeter. Anyways, thanks for watching.